So help me welcome Kate Faulkner and Jennifer Boyce.
Thanks, Bill. So this is so exciting. I can't believe it's 10 years since this project. And talk about interesting topics. I mean, fog, yes, fog is interesting. But rats, I mean, you know, I've had people in my neighborhood, you know, like I'll say, oh, I'm going to give a talk here at the visitor center. And they said, what's to talk about? And I said, oh, it's about eliminating rats. And you just see the look on their face like, really? Like, who would come to that? So I'm so glad that our people are here, and thank you for being interested in the islands, and I know many of you contribute so much time to the protection and education of the public about the islands, so we really appreciate that. So Jen and I decided that we wanted to sort of team present this talk tonight, in part is because the eradication of rats was not a project that any one agency or individual could do. It really took a team effort. There were so many people and organizations involved. So just keep that in mind. This was a big project. It was controversial. It was complex. It was the first ever in the United States. And so there was a lot of firsts. And so it took a lot of people really thinking hard about how to do this and do it right so that we would become an example that allowed many other conservation areas to do something similar rather than the last project and oh my goodness, we are never going to do this again. So, but now 10 years later we can start to celebrate. Okay, so as I mentioned, very much a team effort, many organizations involved, and so I've just listed a few of them here. But you'll be hearing about some of them as we go through this presentation. I know that there's so much about the islands that I don't need to tell you folks about. You know a lot more and more intimately probably than I do about many places on the islands. But just real briefly, for those who might be new, is the Channel Islands National Park encompasses the 4 northern islands and surrounding 1 nautical mile of water, and also Santa Barbara Island to the south. So we have 5 islands within the park. And tonight, most of our focus will be on little Anacapa Island. And every island is special in its own way. The Channel Islands were never connected to the mainland, and because of that separation that they've always had, it makes them very different from the mainland. There are species that never made their way out to the islands, and so in some ways the islands are depauperate of plants and animals, but then for the species that were lucky enough to sort of win the sweepstakes, get across the water, many of them have evolved into separate and unique species, like the island scrub jay and the island fox and the dudleas, many dudleas. And then, of course, also we have a very long and interesting human history on the island with the Native Americans, the Chumash, the ranching era. So approximately 13,000 years of human history on the Channel Islands. So here we are on the mainland. We have about 18 million people here in Southern California, and yet just 15 to 20 miles offshore, we have these incredible wilderness areas. We have an abundance of wildlife. We have species that might occur here on the mainland, but it's pretty rare for you to be able to see them. But you go out to the islands and you can see a California that used to be more common, maybe 200, 300 plus years ago. So really special places. But they've been, you know, there have been alterations over the years. And so a lot of what we have been doing in the recent years, the park, our partners, is working hard to bring back some of the abundance of plants and animals, and also to make sure that they are sustainable and resilient to face some of the future challenges. Islands overall are really important places around the world. They are critically important for protection of biological diversity. And because they have been isolated from other places, they often have plants and animals and other species that don't occur anywhere else. But because of their small size and because of their isolation, Many, many times the species that are on islands, they are easily become endangered because of uses of those islands or alterations. And also, just look at the huge number of percentage of extinctions that occur to species that are on islands. So we know that these islands are special, but they're also very vulnerable. And the rate of extinction is something that has been increasing and is projected to increase even more in the future. So what we think is sort of the normal rate of extinction. Of course, species are evolving, so we have new species that are appearing, but at the same time, it is natural to have some natural background rate of extinction. So it used to be about 1 extinction every 100 years. In modern times, largely because of the success of humans, the fact that we've moved around the globe and now live almost every place, about 100 extinctions every 100 years. So it's a 100-fold increase. What's predicted for the future? 1,000 extinctions per 100 years. And evolution isn't going any faster in creating new species. So what we're seeing and what we're likely to see in the future is an increasing rate of loss of biological diversity. The great thing is here in our backyard at this national park, we have the opportunity to do something different. We have the opportunity to actually protect and to restore species that are currently rare but should be more abundant. Anacapa is a very small island, only about 1,000 acres, but there are a number of endemic and rare species that call that place home. Some species only occur on Anacapa Island. And because of this, and also because of the birds on that island, we deemed it important to move forward with some conservation projects. And this is where Jen Boyce of NOAA is going to come in.
Give me that. Thanks, Kate. So as Kate was mentioning, Anacapa is really a unique jewel in the Channel Islands. There are over 8 species that rely on Anacapa Island for nesting sites. Pictured here are 3 of the species of special concern. The newly named script smirlet, which was previously called the Xanthus smirlet, the Cassin's auklet, and the ashy storm petrel. So these species are, the island represents critical habitat for these nesting seabirds, and they were being impacted by predation by the non-native black rat. So as Kate mentioned, we had a collaboration of partners that came together to address this threat to seabirds from the introduced rats on the island. This is a picture of a depredated eggshell, ashy storm petrel eggshell that's been eaten by the black rats. So we brought together a group of many, many partners to plan and implement this really groundbreaking project to rid Anacapa Island of the introduced black rat. And I'm going to show you now a newly produced video, which is an update to a previous video that documents the process of the project and the subsequent recovery of the seabirds.
Anacapa Island, one of the Channel Islands, just 11 miles off the coast of Southern California. Comprised of 3 islets, Anacapa's steep cliffs, vegetated terrain, and protected beaches provide safe haven for a variety of marine mammals and seabirds. Anacapa is part of the Channel Islands National Park and lies within a marine sanctuary.
You go out to Anacapa Island and you're really in a world apart, where you see seabirds and marine mammals and just a wilderness experience that you can't find here on the mainland any longer. Anacapa became part of Channel Islands National Park in the 1980s. We knew the history of this island. We knew it had been an important place for seabirds. So we're trying to protect that for future generations.
Protecting Anacapa includes keeping the island free of invasive predators found on the mainland. But during the 80s and 90s, resource managers noticed a steady decline in the population of some species of seabirds on Anacapa. One of the primary reasons? Predation by the non-native black rat.
This is the black rat, or the ship rat. We caught him in a building here on the island. After feeding on a summer of seabirds and eggs, he's now looking for more food. There's no more seabirds on the island, so now he's looking far and wide for some of the food that he's used to.
In this infrared footage, a rat is seen attacking decoy eggs placed in a nesting site on Anacapa. The eggs are similar in size and appearance to native seabird eggs.
I mean, the rats affected everything here. They affected the gulls, they affected the murrelets, they affected the mice, they affected the lizards, they affected the vegetation.
The rats prey heavily on a rare nocturnal seabird named the Scripps' murrelet. There are 4 primary breeding islands in the world for these seabirds, and Anacapa is one of them. In the 1990s, estimates indicated there were only 1,500 breeding pairs in all of the Channel Islands, with several hundred of them nesting in the cliffs and caves of Anacapa.
This is an egg that's been eaten by a rat that we found in one of the sea caves at Anacapa Island. You can see the serrated edge with big bite marks where the rats come along and chomped it. This one was really fresh and the rat got it right after it was laid.
It was discouraging because everything we found was broken eggshells. You go into a refuge cave and you find the egg. Next time you go there, the egg is broken, there's no bird.
Broken eggshell that had been...
It is unclear exactly how the rats found their way onto Anacapa.
We don't know exactly when they came out here. Probably came in the late 1800s, perhaps on a shipwreck that occurred north of the island. Or perhaps they came when the Coast Guard was building the lighthouse and the associated structures on Anacapa.
Rats are found on 90% of the world's islands. Estimates indicate that half of the bird and reptile extinctions in the world are due to predation by rats.
It was really important that we brought back this potential habitat here on Anacapa Island, and we provided that and allowed, once again, for murrelets to be able to nest here.
Given the chronic threat to the seabird populations on Anacapa, a group of government, university, and nonprofit organizations partnered together in the late 90s to rid the island of the black rat and document the subsequent restoration.
The removal of invasive species from islands is a very important and a critical conservation tool. And since the 1980s, there's been roughly about 400 rat eradications worldwide.
The project was funded using settlement funds from the 1990 American Trader oil spill in Huntington Beach, the largest oil spill in Southern California in the last few decades.
The American Trader Trustee Council oversees a restoration fund, and it's a really unique program in that the polluter is responsible for paying for these restoration projects and compensating the public for the damages to the natural resources that they caused.
But given that a single pair of rats can theoretically produce over 5,000 offspring in just 1 year, it was clear removing them from the island would be a significant challenge.
The cliffs of Anacapa represented the most daunting challenges, and then compounded by the fact that not only are there rats on the island, but there's this native endemic mouse, endemic to the islands of Anacapa.
So we spent 4 years designing a program that would have the maximum likelihood of eliminating every last rat while still conserving the other native species that are unique to Anacapa Island.
The team developed a strategy based on an innovative technique that had been pioneered in New Zealand, using helicopters to distribute a specially formulated rodenticide. This was the first time an application procedure like this would take place in North America.
I lost sleep I certainly lost sleep at times because we conducted a new and novel technique to us in North America here, but basically adopting technology and techniques that others overseas, particularly New Zealand, had been using for a number of years.
One of the primary concerns of the team was how to minimize the impact of the rodenticide on the island ecosystem, starting with the native deer mice.
We want to know how the mice are functioning as a population before the bait drop, because they'll be affected by the same bait as the rats are.
As insurance, native mice were held in a protected shed until the rodenticide application was finished. The mice were then released the following spring, when food resources were more abundant on the island. Other precautions included capturing and removing the birds of prey that frequented the island before and after the bait was dropped. In some cases, using a great horned owl to flush the raptors out.
We're attempting to capture all the birds of prey, especially the species of special concern, and the ones that are most likely to feed on carrion that has some of the poison bait in it.
Finally, after years of preparation, on a cool, clear December day in 2001, the bait was loaded onto the island and the application began.
I remember an early morning start. The helicopter scheduled today at 7 o'clock. And then the helicopter, you can hear the helicopter coming in from behind. Everybody was in position. We loaded the first hopper load, or the first bait bucket load of bait. And I remember standing on the landing zone, looking at our pilot, and basically giving him the thumbs up, you can go, and him lifting off, and then he started to spread bait.
The team also applied additional bait by hand along cliffs and the shoreline, taking extra precautions to get the pellets into the areas where rats were known to forage.
The implementation of the rat eradication from Anacapa took 2 years to prepare for, and it took about 2 weeks to actually implement that project. And then the waiting started.
For several weeks after the application, the team carefully monitored bait intake and the activity of radio-collared rats. It appears most of the rats took the bait and died in their burrows. Though some raptors and songbirds were lost to the rodenticide, within 6 months, peregrine falcons reappeared on the island. There were also indications the winter survivorship of the native side-blotched lizards had significantly increased since the eradication.
We started monitoring the side-blotched lizards, and we saw great survivorship of the juvenile side-blotched, higher than what it had been when rats were on the island. That's incredible information. Before that, we did not understand that rats were having that kind of impact on the native reptiles and amphibians on Anacapa Island.
During the spring of 2002, the captive deer mice were released back onto the island. Within months, they reproduce and start steadily moving towards their original population levels.
These are the first generation from the captive mice that were released back in April, and they seem to be doing really well.
"10 years after the initial eradication, the benefit of removing rats from the island becomes increasingly evident.
The deer mouse populations for this Anacapa subspecies has gone up as a direct result of the rat eradication.
Tag this mouse. There we go, perfect.
It's only been 10 years since we implemented Anacapa. In ecological time, it's just a drop in the bucket. But the changes were documented or have been documented on the island are incredible.
The seabirds are recovering. They're expanding outside of the sea caves. We're seeing them recolonize areas where they were never thought to be nesting when the rats were present, and to see new species come to the island, discovering ashy storm petrels nests on the island, Cassin's auklets on the island.
And it told us that these birds are ready, willing, and able to utilize these islands, but they just don't have the habitat to do it in.
As for the Scripps' murrelets, researchers are now finding more productive nesting sites with eggs intact in areas that had a history of predation.
This is one of our historic monitoring sites. This is Site 1, and there's an adult sitting in the site.
Biologists are finding that since the eradication, the hatching success of Scripps' murrelets has increased from 30% to 85%.
What we're seeing here at Anacapa Island 10 years post-rat eradication is a highly significant increase in hatching success, and nesting density, or the number of breeding pairs, has also increased.
Landing Cove nest site number 4. It's a site that's been active. When you look at areas like this at Landing Cove and other areas on the island that aren't in the sea caves, the growth rates in this area are upwards of 25% per annum. For a seabird, it's unheard of.
Resource managers now focus on removing invasive plants and replacing them with native plants that grow on the island to help create better nesting habitat for seabirds.
So now that the rats are gone, it really opens up a lot of opportunities for us for ecological restoration island-wide. We still have to make sure that the habitat is here on the islands and that the vegetation is suitable, and that we have soil that these birds can nest in.
Beyond restoration on individual islands, resource managers must continue to respond to the ongoing natural and human factors that impact marine environments throughout the world.
We still have to make sure that there's enough food in the ocean for these seabirds to feed on. We're looking at things like climate change and ocean acidification. So there will be continuous challenges.
Still, the legacy of this project is that there are strategic steps resource managers can take to catalyze ecological restoration.
It's just really satisfying to see the seabirds coming back to the island, and to see that the funds were directed in the most effective way they could be to really bring about substantial change.
I'm excited that Anacapa is part of the conservation history internationally. Being able to look at islands and identify conservation challenges and come up with strategies that will meet the needs of each of these different island ecosystems.
I was recently on Anacapa, and it's like, wow, we had an impact, a positive impact on this ecosystem here in Southern California. And it's paying dividends. The island is paying dividends, and it's going to continue paying dividends for future generations. I can't wait for my grandkids to have the opportunity to visit Anacapa.
That's great. So as we mentioned in the video, we've seen remarkable recovery of the seabirds on the islands since the rats were eradicated. Specifically, we've seen a significant decrease in the amount of predation on the murrelets, as seen in this graph, and subsequently a significant increase in the number of nests on the island. This graph shows the increase in productivity of the Scripps murrelet on Anacapa, and also increase in number of clutches of the seabirds. We've excited to see new species also recolonizing the island that we haven't seen since the rats were on the present. The Cassin's auklet, which is a crevice nesting seabird. We had no confirmed breeding on the island pre-eradication, and post-eradication we confirmed 2 nests in 2003 and 11 nests in 2010. And the ashy storm petrel was another rare crevice nesting seabird. We had no confirmed breeding pre-eradication, and in 2011 we were really excited at the discovery of the first ever confirmed nest of ashy storm petrels on Anacapa. So these are all great signs of just showing the ongoing recovery of the seabirds following the removal of the rats. And as the video also pointed out, one of the goals of the project was to protect the native Anacapa deer mouse. We know that rats eat and compete with mice on the islands for food. Historically, the rats had nearly been eliminated from East Anacapa due to the presence of the introduced rats. So this shows the significant increase of the deer mice population on Anacapa since the eradication. Just to compare to Santa Barbara Island, you can see pre-eradication, the numbers on Anacapa were nowhere near the numbers present on Santa Barbara Island, and post-eradication were almost comparable in populations between Anacapa and Santa Barbara Island. So that shows that the rats were really having a significant impact to the deer mice and in keeping their populations at these very low levels. In another species, that were impacted by the presence of rats were the intertidal invertebrates. Intertidal invertebrates provided a year-round food source for the rats on the island, and we could see that there were significant impacts to those species from the rats, mainly by the middens that were found on the intertidal areas where the rats were leaving behind the carcasses of their prey. We know rats eat intertidal invertebrates. Again, this shows the significant increase in the intertidal pre-eradication. Again, comparing Anacapa to Santa Cruz Island, you can see there's a significant difference pre-eradication in intertidal invertebrates. Post-eradication, again, almost the same populations of intertidal invertebrates. So again, another great sign of the ongoing recovery of the island post-eradication. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Kate, and she's going to talk some more about recovery and some of the next steps on Anacapa Island.
Also, just one thing that I wanted to mention that we just had information in this morning. Jen and I are involved with the Montrose Settlements, which is related to DDT pollution. Montrose Settlements is currently funding peregrine falcon surveys on the islands, and I know you all, I heard a couple people say yay when they saw about the peregrines coming back. So what they found, well, we have 43 nesting territories on the Park Islands this year, which is amazing. Anacapa Island has a nesting pair on East Island, Middle Island, and West Island. So they're really doing well. So yes, so on to herps. So so the herps are the lizards and salamanders on Anacapa Island, and we're going to look specifically at the slender salamander. And this is a species that's endemic to the island. And so different from all the other parts of the ecosystem that we looked at, the slender salamanders, so here's eradication. So here, we've had this kind of uneven monitoring over the years. These NDs are no data. But you can see overall higher numbers than what we've had here in these recent years post-eradication. So that was not what we expected to see. And so we had to ask ourselves, so what is going on out there on Anacapa Island? What else has changed besides the eradication of the rats? Okay, here's just another look at decline of salamanders, grouping all those years. So I know that a lot of you have been out to Anacapa Island. One of the big changes was while we were busy working with rats, the ice plant, which had been planted originally by the Coast Guard, mostly around the buildings, had slowly been marching across Anacapa Island and had become pretty much a monoculture in a lot of areas. So this is not good habitat for the salamanders. So we need to be working on a lot of different fronts. And as many of you know, we have had a very intensive project. This is the third year of an intensive effort to eliminate ice plant from every place we can possibly get on East Anacapa. And it's required a lot of manual labor, a lot of volunteers. So far, the results are excellent. We've got a nursery that's operating on the island. We are bringing back the native vegetation. This will be important not just for the seabirds, it's important for their nesting habitat, but also good for all the other biota on the island, particularly the herps and the deer mice. California brown pelicans. This is also a very important nesting habitat on West Anacapa for brown pelicans, roosting on East Anacapa. The pelicans for a few years, the last 3 years, we have not had good years of productivity for pelicans. So what is going on? This Anacapa has historically been the largest colony. In recent years, we've generally had about 5,000 nests on West Anacapa. The last couple of years, it has been close to 0. So yes, it's not been good. So what is going on? Well, we know that there have been changes in the marine ecosystem. I mentioned the DDT. You know, there was DDT that was manufactured in Southern California. A lot of it has gotten into the ecosystem. That did cause impacts to California brown pelicans, but they have recovered from that, even though it is still in the ecosystem. It is still in the sea lions and the bald eagles, but all these species are able to breed out here successfully. So that is not the reason for poor productivity in recent years. The birds are actually abandoning their nests. Okay, shifting baseline. So what is happening with the marine ecosystem? In the old days, huge fish were much more the norm than they are today. These days, fishermen are pretty much happy with whatever they can get. So this is an important part of protecting and restoring island ecosystems. It's making sure that the marine environment is also healthy. So the marine protected areas around the Channel Islands, this has been a big effort between the park, the National Marine Sanctuary, the state of California, the stakeholder groups, the fishing organizations. Everyone got around the table and said, yes, we do want to protect these very healthy, diverse marine ecosystems around the islands. An incredible percentage of the kelp forests in California occur at the Channel Islands. So in 2003, the nearshore state marine protected areas were established, and then shortly thereafter, the federal government also extended the marine protected areas. The Park Service has a very active kelp forest monitoring program, and these are all of our monitoring sites, and we're looking pretty intensively inside and outside of the marine protected areas to try and understand what is the effect of harvest on marine resources, because fish are what these seabirds are feeding on. This is a little bit complex slide, but basically this line here tells you there's no difference inside or outside of a marine protected area. So it kind of tells you maybe harvest doesn't have an effect on this species or that species. So targeted species are ones that are harvested, and what you can see is that overall, species that are harvested occur in larger numbers, higher density inside of marine protected areas than outside. It kind of makes sense. That's what we expected. But what was really exciting was that we started to see it even more quickly than what we had expected. So within just a few years after establishment of the marine protected areas, we started to see bigger fish and more fish inside of the protected areas. Interestingly, some fish, these are fish that are not harvested, they actually do better when harvest is going on. And why is that? It's because the competition's being removed or their predators are being removed. And so they're more numerous. That might not be good. It means things are kind of out of whack in that ecosystem. But, oops, I didn't mean to go forward so fast. So anyhow, so what's happening with the pelicans? We think that the food supply just isn't there. Now maybe it's changing water temperatures, and the anchovies and sardines that they want have moved elsewhere. And so we need to be working on a lot of different fronts, right? We're working in the marine environment. We got to make sure that the food supply is there for these seabirds. We got to make sure that they're protected on the island, that we don't have unnatural predators there, that we have the habitat for them to nest in. And then of course we have to make sure, because we put so much effort and time and money and expertise into removing the rats from Anacapa Island, we might want to make sure that we don't bring any new species back there. And so that's where a lot of you come into play. You're educators, you're out there in the public, you're going out to the islands. We're gonna remove these non-natives. We're gonna have the islands flourish for the native and endemic species that exist out there, and we're going to protect these islands for future generations. So with that, well, thank you so much, and we're going to have time for questions for both myself and Jen.
This is to Kate. I was kind of surprised by the reduction in nests with the brown pelican, and that's also in light of a fairly recent decision to, as I understand it, to delist the brown pelican. Could that move be a little bit premature?
Well, we just had a long discussion with Fish and Wildlife Service about that yesterday. And so the California brown pelican was listed as threatened. Actually, a number of subspecies were listed by Fish and Wildlife Service, and they were delisted a couple of years ago. I think that it would be premature to say that we have such a severe problem that was a mistake. The pelicans seem to be doing very well in Baja California. So that's one of the challenges, is because they are nesting over a rather broad area, Gulf of California, on the Pacific Islands of Baja, then also up here as far north as the Channel Islands. We really have this large population. We're not aware of any chronic threat over a huge area, but something is happening locally. 1 year, 2 years, that's kind of normal, for these birds. They do go up and down. 3 years, it's starting to sort of raise the red flag, and so our first task is to start to look to better understand. At the same time, I think a lot of you heard about the recent mortalities, or the high level of mortality of California sea lion pups. There are a lot of strandings on beaches. Sea lions and pelicans feed on a lot of the same food, and so it might be an indicator that for some reason, there's a shift in those food supplies. And so there is a coalition of biologists and oceanographers that are coming together to look at trying to explain what is going on, and hopefully, after they get a chance to crunch some of that data, we'll understand, what might be a reason for this. But, yeah.
Kate, or Jen, either one of you can answer this. Were the rats on all 3 islets, or were they primarily just on East Anacapa? That's the first part. The second part is, to me, it's mind-boggling that using the techniques, the rotary dispersion of the rodenticide was able to eliminate all the rats. How long did it take to figure out that they were all gone? Because it seemed like you were releasing the mice and the other species back in fairly quickly.
Right. Do you want me to take that? Okay, so the rats were on all 3 of the islets. We actually did the eradication over 2 years. And actually, I should say it was 2 separate eradications, really. And the reason why we did that was because we wanted to protect the deer mice, and we wanted to make sure that deer mice were always in the wild. And by dividing the project into 2 separate projects, so the first year we eliminated the rats from East Anacapa. So while that was happening, deer mice were in the wild on Middle and West, and also in the mouse house. And so we sort of had double protection for them. It was also a chance for us to make sure that we could absolutely eliminate those rats. And so after we were successful that first year, then the next year we went and treated Middle and West Anacapa. So we sort of took advantage of that natural break between the islands. This was a very challenging project because rats don't have to move all that much to get everything that they need to get themselves through the year, especially when they're in a habitat where there's a lot of food, like the intertidal, or like when you have a lot of seabird eggs around. So that was why a lot of calculation had to go into really understanding the nooks and crannies of the island, understanding the movements of rats. So we had rats radio collared for years that we were following their movements because we needed to know, where are they going? Are they going and staying in the intertidal all the time? Or do those rats have to also come up on the island? And we didn't want to put out too much bait, but we also couldn't put out not quite enough. So we didn't want one rat to go hungry without getting bait. And the other thing was the eradication. Part of the reason why it took place in the fall of the year, so it was in November and December, was because the rats and mice, they breed all through the summer up to very high numbers. They essentially eat themselves out of house and home. And so we had a natural decline of rats that would happen through the winter. Usually 75–80% of the population would naturally die off anyhow. So you always start the spring at low numbers. So we needed to get those rats just at the top before the die-off so that they were hungry and they would be willing to go for the bait. And Joel, I don't know if I answered all of your questions. Okay.
I was gonna add that one thing that's not on the video is that they actually had a GPS system, so when they were going around the island, they could actually plot exactly where the helicopter had covered, just to make sure that they did cover every inch of the island. So that was really critical.
Right here, Kate. What about the presence of rats on the other Channel Islands?
Well, that's part of what Kate was getting at with the biosecurity work that we're doing to really prevent any kind of reintroduction. I think rats are only on San Miguel at this point, so and San Clemente. So there's definitely a risk, but that's why a lot of effort's been going into preventing, being aware of how to control introductions, and having things like when there's a ship grounding, rat spill kits and things like that, because it's becoming more prevalent and more, we know more that almost as much as a risk of oil from ship groundings are rat spills as well, because rats typically live on these big ships, and so when something like that happens, it's something we are now prepared to react to with poison and traps. Anything else?
Well,
Got one over there.
I was just wondering, what are the numbers of the rats on San Miguel? I mean, is this an acute problem? How long have they been there?
We don't know when the rats got to San Miguel. San Miguel is different from Anacapa in a couple ways. It is a larger island, so that makes it challenging in some ways. Another big difference is the presence of foxes on San Miguel. And foxes prey on the rats. And we saw that dramatically when the foxes went into captivity in 1999, I think was when we brought foxes into captivity on San Miguel Island. And for several years, we had no foxes in the wild. It was very interesting, the changes that we started to see. So you start to understand the implications of each species when you remove them from the system. Well, one of those changes was rats. They started to move off of the beaches and cliff areas where they are generally forced to stay on San Miguel Island, and we started to see them in the center of the island. When foxes went back out into the wild, and now foxes are at about historical population levels, 450 to 500 foxes on San Miguel Island, that once again, the rats are not occurring, not seen very often in the middle section of the island. So they're pretty much relegated to some of the beaches. That said, we would very much like to eliminate rats from San Miguel Island. The problem is we don't have a method that can do it without having unacceptable impacts to the foxes. So it is a project that I guess we'll have to wait until the right time. I think that there are tools that are being developed. New Zealanders are very clever. They're very focused on non-native species. They were actually working on development of a Rattus-specific toxicant. And if they can get that figured out, they know that there's a market for it worldwide. But they haven't quite gotten there yet. But we'll probably be first in line to try to use it on San Miguel.
I have two questions. First of all, what happened to Xanthus?
Okay. Right.
And second of all, I noticed on one of the slides when you were talking about the kelp studies that the initial funding was by NRPP. So that would just bring up a funding question as to whether if further studies or eradications or whatever need to be done, if there is funding, if there's any left, what?
Well, the Xanthus merlet, they split the species into two species. So the southern Baja population, which is now called the Guadalupe merlet, and then we have the Scripps merlet. So we no longer have the Xanthus merlet. Just to make our lives more complicated, we have to reprint all of our outreach material. But do you want to answer the question?
Sure. Okay, funding, NRPP funding. I guess I'm so used to these acronyms. It didn't even occur to me that that wouldn't be understood by everybody. And it actually is not important, so I'm going to take it out of the slide. So it's a Park Service source of funding, Natural Resources Protection Fund. And we use it for 3-year projects. Anacapa ice plant eradication came from that. Unfortunately, that fund isn't doing so well these days, so I'm not sure how much we'll get in the future. The rat eradication, some of the big projects that we're doing, we can't get the money within the Park Service. There just isn't that kind of money available. That's why it was so fortuitous that American traders came along when we knew here at the park that we needed to eliminate rats, but it was a project that was so far beyond our financial abilities. Jen was a trustee with American Trader Trustee Council, and as they said in the video, and I think maybe Jen mentioned, it had been an oil spill, and so it was a case of the polluter pays. They'd gone through a court settlement, so there was actually some funds that were available for the purpose of restoring seabirds that had been impacted by the oil. And so it took the kind of money that is available through a trustee settlement to fund the rat eradication. So, and that's things now with bringing bald eagles back, for instance. Same type of thing, Montrose settlements, that's the DDT settlements. And so that's had been paid by these private companies and allows us to do some big projects that we could not undertake otherwise. But the kelp forest monitoring program, that is a base-funded program here at the park. We do have dedicated staff, been doing that for over 30 years, and that is something that we're committed to for the long term. And Montrose has put money into that also, yeah.
Well, one more?
With the ranching and everything on all the other islands, it's hard to understand that there are no rats on any of the other islands.
It is amazing. Sometimes people can't believe, like, where are the cats? We should have cats. And actually, there used to be cats on, like, Anacapa Island and Santa Barbara, and actually all the islands had feral cats at some point. And sometimes they just disappeared. Other times, some individuals actually had to take action. But with all the shipping of animals that went out to the islands, people are amazed that we do not have rats on every island. So we got lucky somehow, or somehow they disappeared on their own. I know she's been raising her hand for one more question.
You said there were no pelican nests on West Anacapa this year at all. Were there any on Santa Barbara Island?
Yeah, so we do have some nests out there, but there has been no productivity. So, well, I shouldn't say no, but very, very low the last couple of years. So a lot of abandonment. So we did have birds that established nests, but then they abandoned. We do have I think it's a few hundred nests on Santa Barbara Island this year, but that's a low effort for there also. And the biologists have not been out real recently to look at Anacapa, but there was very few nests that were established when they did look at the beginning of the season, and it's pretty late, but they are going to go out here in the next couple of weeks and try and get a count.
Well, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kate. Let's give them a big hand of applause.